I'm live. All right. That seems to be metering fairly well. Good evening, everyone. So this is something I'd have to say was inspired by the Homo Correctus section of the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where there's correction of things. They were talking about, Kyle and Russ were talking about prisms, and they know very well how prisms work. It's just that they were talking about light going the same speed, and then I was mentioning to them about how in refraction, the speed actually changes from side to side, and this has really interesting implications. So first, a little primer on how weird prisms are. We have one. In fact, I have a prism right here. Inside the fish tank, I think everyone knows what prisms look like, but this is more fun. You actually get to see how it goes and how it works, and it's because of how this reflects. Speed of light is not constant. Speed of light in a vacuum is the fastest it goes, and it slows down when it gets in the atmosphere, and it slows down again when it gets into something like glass. So if you imagine something that's like that's a neat effect. If you imagine something that's like a cart entering, if you have a four-wheeled wagon or a lawnmower or something, and you hit grass from pavement straight on, nothing much happens. But if you hit on at an angle, it turns because half of it goes slower and half of it goes faster. It's something like that with because of the reflectivity index. Different wavelengths will go at different speeds and spread out differently when it hits an angle if it's something of a high reflectivity index. I hope that's a good summary of refraction. So the interesting thing about this is that that's why you see a rainbow, because it spreads out. The analogy that I use is it's kind of like a deck of cards, is that the white light is like the edge of a deck of cards where you're seeing only the white. And when you turn it, when you're spreading it out without scattering the deck of cards, you're kind of tilting it, and then you get to see the colors beneath it. On one side, you have the red. On the other side, you have the blue, green in between. So when this principle of refraction was first explored with so-called modern science in the 1600s, a guy named Huygens, who actually did a lot of work also on pendulums. Huygens also did work on prisms. And so it's due to the conservation of momentum. So the same thing physically that affects how pendulums work, that causes entrainment in pendulums, although that's another story, makes refraction happen. So a philosopher named Leibniz, Gottfried von Leibniz, speculated metaphysically. So there's physics and then metaphysics on the outside of physics. He speculated that it would make sense if the same consistency that applies to matter also applies to spirit. And that it would make sense that if our spirits are working with this world, there has to be some kind of continuity in how things work. That's what makes it metaphysical. You can't prove anything in metaphysics. It's beyond physics. But it's interesting for speculation. And so he thought that this was his solution to dualism, the idea of spirit and matter being distinct, but coming from two realms which are synchronized. And he called that, I won't get into this here, but he called this the pre-established harmony, that the matter world and the spirit world are somehow the same, but different. I think a good metaphor for that, he's lacked a good metaphor. He talks about two pendulums. I think a prism is a better metaphor than a pendulum. If Leibniz were still alive, I would ask him about this. And given that Huygens helped describe the behavior of both prisms and pendulums, I think this makes sense. Following this train of thought, if the prisms and pendulums are using the conservation of matter, conservation of momentum, then you could think of what would a metaphysical prism be like. It might be that when we're born, if you have the idea that your soul pre-exists your body, it exists in your body, and then it exists after your body. Think of two prisms next to each other, and the very famous Dark Side of the Moon logo / album covers showing this. If you put one next to it, or if you imagine them mirrored, and you can do this with any two prisms, beam of white light goes through it, makes the rainbow recombines with another prism. You can think that there is a prism of the soul when we're born, and we're kind of spread out into these colorful things, and then it gets reunited. And so your body is like the rainbow, and your soul is like the beam of light. And you're spread out into color at birth, reunited at death. Interestingly enough, this is a good way. I have no idea if the Egyptians understood it this way, but they thought of the soul as being spread out during life and united at death. The Egyptians actually, this might merit a whole thing on its own, but they described the soul in different ways. There was the Ba, the Ka, and the Ak. The Ka is the soul double. So your Ka is the part of your consciousness, like your soul consciousness. Your Ba is your oversoul. Like your higher self, that sometimes you're in your right mind, sometimes you're not. That was represented by a little bird with a human head. And the Ba and the Ka were not always united, but at the time of death, they are, like the sun going over the horizon, which interestingly enough gets into Goethe's color theory. We might go into Goethe's color theory later. He arrived at his color theory by looking through a prism and seeing how at the edges of things color was created. Rather than what Newton did by isolating the beam of light. And by doing this, weirdly enough, Goethe anticipated the discovery of rods and cones in the eyes a few hundred years before biology recognized that. Goethe was considered just ridiculous and crazy before then. But yeah, so that's the idea there. So it might be, there'll be more on this later, but I'm trying to work this out. I'm also trying to take very seriously the idea of how it works that the infrared and the ultraviolet are spread out and turn a specific way, that there's an order to this. And again, the very new agey way of understanding the chakras, analogizing cavities in the human body to metaphysical concepts, that red is low and blue is higher up. Mental faculties and speech faculties at higher frequencies, and physical faculties and creative faculties at lower frequencies. There might be some use philosophically in thinking of the unification and division of the soul this way. And I think certainly it might be a helpful way of understanding how something can be separated and reunited with nothing created and nothing destroyed, simply a variety of expression. Thought-provoking. I'm going to be doing one of these every day. So I hope that's something that's good instead of bad. As always, please like, subscribe, and especially have comments below. Thank you very much.